Happy afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this, our first ever in-house videoed CPD session. So the theory here is that the best CPD is often quite short. It should be regular, so it should be spaced frequently throughout the year, and perhaps most importantly, it should provide an opportunity for teachers to discuss and then apply some of the learning that's hopefully taking place. And so by bringing whole school CPD directly into department meetings and by physically saving us the time that it takes to come together as a whole school, I hope sessions like this go some way in supporting these aims. So please do let me know what we think about this, and then we can continue to develop and improve as the year goes on. So today I want to unpick a little bit about retrieval. Now, at a glance, we're talking about rehearsal, recall, quizzing, testing, and if we were going to steal directly from Rosenshine, which is hugely popular at the moment, then we'd probably rephrase these as daily, weekly, and monthly review. But actually, it's deeper than that. And if what we're going to do is to be truly effective, then we also need to consider spaced practice, interleaving, concrete examples, elaboration. And all of these terms sit nicely under this broader term of retrieval at SJBC. Now, the principle here that pins all of this together is that retrieval is about forming connections. What pupils are actually doing is building schema. And if we're not considering retrieval as something much deeper and we're just doing simple testing, then the questions that we ask will get the same results. Pupils need to go away and work on it. So we need to be more forensic about this. The power here is in actually activating prior knowledge. And the key is that these are completed with little support. So I mentioned before about schema. Now, a very, very brief description of what that is here. A schema is how knowledge is arranged in our mind. So as we become more familiar with a topic, the organization of that schema becomes more orderly. And because it's more orderly, it's easier for us to access. In a simple sense, organized schema is what separates novices from experts. And if we think about the Ofsted framework and the emphasis at the moment on curriculum and considering what we teach and when and what has come before this content, that's the type of question that they'll be asking. That's taking into account that our mind works best by building schema. And so retrieval theory is a practice that we can use to support this. And the more times we pull information from our brain, one, the more likely it is to stay there, but two, the more able it is to support the information that's following it. And so when we do that effectively, what we're really doing is interleaving content and building schema. For me, if we can get this right, and some good schools have managed to push this out across all of their subjects and the way they do things, then really what we're talking about here is that retrieval should be part of our language for learning. It should be an aspect of lessons that pupils become familiar with and in their own way able to articulate. So if you do any reading around retrieval, you'll quickly come across lots and lots of wonderful reasons why people believe it's so effective. But for me, there are three big ones. Number one, retrieval aids retention. The more we pull information out of our long-term memory, then the more likely it is to stay there. Seems common sense, right? Number two, testing encourages pupils to study. If we can create a culture and provide a framework in which this is possible, and I hope our use of teams and our homework policy goes some way in supporting this, then we can begin to develop these skills in our pupils. Thirdly, retrieval identifies gaps. We can then use this to inform our planning. And again, our low stakes testing model is designed to support exactly this. So hopefully we're convinced that retrieval practice has the potential to be effective. But now we need to brace ourselves for the certainty that this is going to be frustrating. We should prepare for pupils forgetting, and actually, if we're smart, we should accept that this is part of the learning process. There is evidence to suggest that retrieving just before we forget is the most powerful time in which to do it. I'm sure we're all familiar with the picture here that gives a visual representation of the forgetting curve, which we've seen and discussed before. So big question, how long should we wait before retrieving previous material? Now, there's no simple answer to that. sadly, this is a common theme amongst much of the work or the research that takes place in education. There are very few real-world examples. All the research that is gathered tends to be done in controlled settings, usually by researchers in universities, not with teachers and actual pupils. But there is some consensus, and the research has shown that any space practice is better than no space practice. A more useful question for me is not how long should I wait after teaching content before retrieval practice, but how long before a high stakes test should we retrieve? For this, there are more reliable suggestions from the research. In sort of simple money, if the test is 1 month away, then we should be looking to retrieve that content roughly once a week. And principle sort of gets larger. If the test is 2 months away, then we should be looking to cover that content or retrieve that content once every 2 weeks. And so a better approach is to consider and plan backwards from PPEs rather than forwards from content. So what does retrieval practice actually look like at SJBC? Now, for me, if we separate these into 3 different areas, it helps our understanding of it, and it helps us articulate how we deliver this. We've got high stakes testing and low stakes testing. These we've been doing for several years now and are fairly well embedded. And I would imagine if you spoke to any of our pupils, they would be able to speak quite well about how we do that here. The third one, what I'm referring to as no stakes testing, that's about us upping the volume of retrieval practice in normal lessons. So this is this daily review. And for me, again, the easiest way to differentiate between the 3 is in terms of sharing the results. So high stakes tests, there are formal PPEs sat in the exam hall, and we share the results directly with parents. Our low stakes tests take place in class, and we collect results and we save them on Teams this year, and we're sharing them across a class. And then our low stakes tests, often actually we're not necessarily going to take the results in, and even if we did, we're going to go to the extra effort of recording them. Those results generally are shared with the pupil. Now when we combine all of these 3 together, and I hope this graphic goes some way to painting that, what we're doing is raining retrieval on our pupils, and that's the ambition for this year. We want to get to a point where pupils are familiar and in routines, and this is something that they can articulate about learning at SJBC. So consider it in terms of these 3 areas. What I would ask you to think about as you move forwards, and in today's meeting this might be a useful discussion. For a pupil, what is the difference between low stakes testing and no stakes testing? How will they identify the difference? And I do think it's important that we take some time to consider that and train them on that. Will they know when the results of one retrieval square exercise is being recorded compared to another one when it isn't? It may be as simple as saying that no stakes testing takes place in books and low stakes testing takes place on paper and is then stored in their books. But that's for departments to agree, and I'm happy for flexibility across the school within those areas, as long as we're confident and able to talk about these 3 distinct areas as separate entities. So one of the keys to effective retrieval is ensuring that pupils are going it alone. No notes. Remember, what we're trying to do is build schema, and this is going to require placing cognitive load on them. But we know that there are going to be some that struggle, and it's important that we attempt to address issues before they arise if we know that they're likely to. And so to demonstrate learned helplessness, I'll quickly use the example of elephant trainers in India. Now, when they take a young elephant and they're training it, they tie it to a post to stop it running away, and they use a relatively small rope. Now, at that age, when an elephant is small, the rope that they use is sufficient to stop them running away. Yet, as the elephant grows, the rope remains the same. Now, a fully grown adult elephant would have no issues in simply snapping that rope and walking off. Yet, from a young age, it has learned that it is pointless to try, because every time it tries, it fails, and so it's given up. And you can actually see real pictures in India of fully grown elephants with tiny little ropes holding them up. This is what we refer to as learned helplessness, and some of our pupils will feel like this. Now, I certainly don't have all the answers, and this is particularly true here. What's quite sad is, although there's a lot of enthusiasm in education for retrieval at the moment, and that's excellent, what's disappointing is that this concept of learned helplessness and the effect of retrieval on some pupils, there's very, very little guidance. So really all I can do is share at this stage what I intend to do. But then ultimately what we'll need to do is build a collection of effective resources and strategies as a school and share. So please consider learned helplessness and plan for it. In my lessons, what I hope to do, where I feel that this is taking place and I get a sense that a pupil has given up, is perhaps prep them. Now, I don't want to give them resource and help during the actual retrieval practice, but that's not to say that I couldn't tell them what is coming up. The key is in that they are preparing for stuff and then that they are actually able to pull it from their mind. So where I can see a pupil needs some additional help, maybe giving them the questions or the resource that I'm going to use in the following lesson and asking them to use that and prepare will support their confidence and hopefully do something to reduce their feeling of helplessness. So when we're delivering retrieval practice in our lessons, it's important that we follow these basic rules, and they'll help us make sure that it's effective and useful for the pupils as well as for us. So rule number one, nice and simple, it's got to involve everyone. And this is where retrieval separates directly from questioning. Questioning is going to involve much fewer pupils. Retrieval has to involve everyone in the class. And nice and simple, checking it has got to be easy. In an ideal world, you are not checking it. It may be that pupils are self-marking, it may be that they're swapping with partners, but it's got to be really quick, really simple. I won't go through all of these because you can read them for yourself. Another one that I quite like is this concept of varying the diet. It's an often seen flaw amongst teachers. When we get something that we like and when we find something that works, we tend to plough it to death. And I remember last year I was guilty of this. I remember sharing some stuff at the start of the year that was the retrieval squares exercise, and then about 15 weeks later I sort of reflected and looked back and found that I'd been doing that same exercise every single lesson for 15 weeks, and by the end of it the pupils were bored to death of it. And so varying the diet, constantly changing the way they do it, and it doesn't need to be huge. We're talking about simple subtle changes. 2 or 3 things on a rotation will be enough to do that and keep pupils on their toes. But we don't want to plough something to death. That's not going to be effective for the pupils. And this is perhaps the most important thing here, is got to be time efficient. Retrieval's fantastic, and if we start to use it well, it will support the pupils in accessing the next stage of the lesson. But it's got to do exactly that. It's got to sit as one stage of our lesson. And if we're not careful, a common mistake is that retrieval begins to dominate a lesson, and it shouldn't do that. If retrieval exercise in our 15-minute lessons is taking more than 10 to 15 minutes, then we should be questioning how effective we are at delivering it, and that will ask us to then go back and consider a different strategy, maybe reduce the number of questions that we're doing or the management of the pupils to deliver it. But we've got to keep it time efficient within the lesson and then workload efficient for us. And I'll repeat this again, we should not be going home and marking sort of standard practice retrieval exercises in classrooms. So I'll leave you with some questions to finish, and I hope these will be useful for you in terms of structuring a conversation within your departments for the next 10 minutes or so. And what I would say is just that when I spoke the other day in terms of our whole school systems around teaching and learning and being confident enough to have some flexibility and saying that what happens in a music classroom will look different from what we might see in a different teacher's room, and I think that's brave and that's correct. What we do need, though, is consistency across departments. So whatever you discuss now and hopefully agree, please bear in mind that we do need to see consistency across a department. And if you're new to the school, one of the reasons behind that is that when we do finish an assessment cycle and pupils complete their first PPEs, there will be movement between classes. So we want a scenario where a child can move from one teacher within a subject to a different and expect to see a similar level in terms of practice and certainly in terms of the way they are delivering these core elements of our teaching and learning framework. I'll just finish by saying if you are interested in retrieval and you want to explore that a little bit further, an excellent place to start is a book by Kate Jones, which is coincidentally called Retrieval Practice. There's also on Teams a staff room area, and within that you'll find a CPD channel. If you click in there and take a look in the files section, very shortly I'll be uploading lots of articles and research, particularly around retrieval, in the retrieval section. So do take a look at that, and as ever, please do come back to me with any thoughts or ideas and suggestions.